traveler, big dreamer, and supposedly self-professed mediocre birder. Really, Jody? Jody Enck, who will lead the presentation for our Ecuador trip. Here we go. Jody?
Cool. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. How you doing tonight? Great. Well, you're not going to have to listen to me very long because this is a three-part presentation. And we're going to leave lots of time for questions because I think that your questions are probably going to stimulate more interesting discussion, certainly than anything I can tell you. But there are three of us who are present tonight. I'm going to kick it off, and I'm going to start with sharing a little bit about the trip, but also answering some questions that I get asked fairly frequently about these international trips that the Cayuga Bird Club offers. And then Stephanie is going to follow up with some of her impressions about the trip. And then Robyn Bailey is going to wrap things up for us. So with that, let me just try to figure out how to move the phone. Cool. All right. So one of the very first things that people always ask me is, why do we even take these international trips? You know, why does the Bird Club bother to do this? And really, it's a way to help all of us explore the world, learn about conservation challenges and successes. And as you know, I'm the conservation chair of the Bird Club, and I really like to try to stimulate people by giving them firsthand experiences, going and experiencing conservation successes, but also the challenges that exist in places that are trying to share or trying to save the same birds that we share. These trips also give us a chance to connect to birders and conservation really champions through the birds that we share. And really, it allows us to experience the wonder of birds in their natural habitats, birds like what you see up there on the screen. We saw a chestnut-capped brush finch. Think of a towhee. These birds are much like towhees. We saw black and white owls, and we saw this umbrella bird. In fact, we even stayed at an umbrella bird lodge. Why do we go to Ecuador? This was the thing that was actually suggested by one of the people who went on a trip, Kate Graham. She said, you know, I've never been to Ecuador and I'd really like to go, and it has lots of cool birds. So why don't we go? And not only that, why don't we go in the summer? Because as an educator, she and other educators can't go during, you know, when the snow flies, when the rest of us want to go somewhere warm. The educators are really busy with the things that they are doing. So we went in the summertime and we had an absolutely fantastic time. Turns out Ecuador is a really wonderful place to go birding. It has the highest density of bird species in the world. It's really a fairly small country. It's only about the size of the state of Nevada. And if you take a look at the map of South America, you realize that it's a really small country up in the northwest corner of the continent, and it represents only about 1.5% of the land area of the entire continent. So it's really a small country, but it has over 1,670 species of birds, which is actually the third highest in the world. The only higher number of species are Colombia, which is to the north of Ecuador, and Peru, which is to the south and east of Ecuador. They literally surround Ecuador. So those three countries are really a birdie part of the world. We also share more than 200 species with Ecuador. So there's a chance to see lots of birds that migrate back and forth between the two countries. There are 44 endemic species of bird in Ecuador, and about half of those are Darwin's finches. So you have to go to the Galapagos to see those birds. We did not go to the Galapagos. However, we did go to Isla de la Plata off the coast, about 43 kilometers off the coast by boat. And we got to see a whole bunch of birds that actually do nest on the Galapagos. And you'll see some pictures of those in just a little bit. We saw lots of other really rare and range restricted species, and I'm going to share a couple of pictures of some of those in a minute, and Robyn's going to share some as well. So these are birds where if you want to see them, you have to go to Ecuador, and you have to go to certain places in Ecuador because that's the only place they occur in the entire world. It's really pretty cool. So, and we also experienced lots of conservation challenges and some successes along the way, and we'll talk about those as we go. All right, so where do we go birding? If you take a look at that map up there, those are all the eBird lists that we submitted on our trip. That's where we went. So we had over 100 eBird lists on our 2 weeks that we were there. We this is where my eyes don't work as well on a little screen as they do on the big screen up there. We flew into Guayaquil, which you can see is right here underneath some of our eBird tags. And we went down and we spent some time in the mangroves in a place called Manglari Chirute Ecological Reserve. Then we went on down to the Umbrella Bird Lodge here at Buenaventura Reserve. We further went south and stopped at the Herrick Lodge in the Herrick Reserve. We actually went down, this little blue pin right here is in Peru. We actually crossed the border long enough to have a beer and do the e-birding in Peru. So that was a lot of fun. Then we went up over to Loja and then down the east side of the Andes. And we spent some time at the Copalinga Reserve and the Copalinga Lodge. We visited the Podocarpus National Park over here, which gets at the lower elevation. It's still cloud forest, so it's still mid elevations, but it's the lower part of the mid elevations. And so you start picking up some of the Amazon basin birds in that part of the country. And then we went back to Loja and then down south again, and we stopped at the Tapachalaca Reserve and Casa Simpson, spent a few days there. And then we started heading north. We went up and stayed a night in the wonderful city of Cuenca. And from there, we visited the El Cajas National Park. And we went back to Guayaquil. Then we went over to the West Coast. And we went up and went to the Isla de la Plata. Spent a couple of days here around Ayampe. And then came back to Guayaquil and flew home. So we had an absolutely marvelous trip. It was a great time. And now let's talk about some birds. Oh, how about some scenery? So we saw a dizzying array of this, just different habitats and different sceneries. As you look at those pictures, we saw places that were, high in the Andes, but still below tree line. Then we saw places that were above tree line, above 12,000 feet in the Andes. We went to some of these places in the Southwest that have really dry thorn forest. So they're deciduous forests that don't have leaves on in summer because it's a dry season. So it was like being in the middle of winter, only these trees all have really thick thorns on them. And it did rain a little bit, so there was a rainbow right there. But a lot of these dry thorn forests are in the inter-Andean valleys. So on the west side of the hills, you have these cloud forests, some very wet, moist forests. And over on the rain shadow side of the hill, on the east side, they don't get rain much. It couple of inches per year. And so it's a completely different set of vegetation, completely different habitat type, and completely different bird community that you have there. You can see this big tree with its really thick trunk storing water. Reminds you a little bit of, being on the African plains and seeing some of the baobab trees. You can just see the different kind of habitats that we experience there. So we even stormed ashore on Isla de la Plata. This is us coming off the boat. We had to have a wet landing because there's no infrastructure, no docks for boats to land at. You have to kind of jump out on the beach. And we saw lots and lots of birds. I put a whole bunch up here just because we saw a rainbow color of birds everywhere we went. There were some trees that we encountered, especially around the Podocarpus National Park, where we had those moments where you'd have 10 or 15 minutes of pure chaos because there were, I don't know how many species of tanagers in one tree, but a lot. And they're all moving around, and we're trying to get everybody on these birds. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And you're there and you're heaving because you've just been so excited and you can't imagine the things that you've just seen and everything. And then it's quiet all of a sudden because they're off doing something else in another place. But all of the species that you see up here are ones that we saw. I personally saw 355 species of birds on the trip. So it was pretty good. One of the first new birds that I saw was this horned screamer that you see up here. And one of the last new birds on the trip that I saw was the Chilean flamingo. And we saw lots of things in between. I'm not sure how many species of hummingbirds we ended up seeing, but it was a couple of dozen species. Really, really pretty cool things. I want to share with you experiences we have with just two of the really rare species. One of those was this blue-throated hill star. This is a hummingbird species. It was discovered just in 2017, so literally about 5 or 6 years ago. It's critically endangered. It's found only on a few mountaintops above 12,000 feet in Ecuador. And you see this dot right here? This is where it lives. And if you want to see it, you have to go there and nowhere else. And so you travel up and you look out across the treeless paramo, and you look especially for these orange flowers, because this is the only thing that it feeds on. It was pretty cold, probably maybe high 30s to around 40 degrees. It was windy. It's like that all the time up there. And this is where this hummingbird lives. It doesn't migrate anywhere. It lives there year round. This is its home. And there's only between 100 and 400 of them in the whole world. And so we were able to see one, and that was just really special. Another really rare bird we saw was the Jocotoco antpitta. This was a bird that I really wanted to see on the trip because we stayed at 4 different Jocotoco Foundation lodges in southern Ecuador. And again, you can see on the range map, if you want to see it, you have to go to this couple of mountaintops in either southeastern Ecuador or just across the border in Peru. It's not a true endemic. It used to be until just a year or 2 ago when they found a couple of them on this mountain that's just across the border in Peru. But we went out before dawn in the dark, started our hike, hiked in a little less than a mile on a trail that started out pretty decent and got a little slipperier, and there's a landslide in 1 or 2 places that kind of wiped out most of the trail. You have to kind of scramble across. And it was intermittently raining while we were hiking in. And then while we got in there to this place where they have provide worms for these antpittas. And so there's a place that the antpittas are used to guides coming and actually calling their name. And so we went and we waited for an hour in the rain for this bird to show up, and it wasn't showing up. And it was a little disappointing. And I had been drinking way too much coffee in the morning. And so I needed to go get rid of some coffee. And so I went hiking down the trail a little ways, and I get just like out of sight of everybody. And I kind of look up, and here's this bird looking at me with big eyes, like, who are you? And I'm looking at this bird like, who are you? And I have to kind of back away like this and go back to the guide, and I tap him on the shoulder and I go like this, and he turns around, he sees the bird, and he starts calling this bird, and it comes in, and it started feeding on some worms, and here you can see it's sitting right there. But it was a great experience. And the people in the local villages, they love these really rare birds, and they really build those birds into the things that they do locally. In fact, if you take a look at their artwork, you'll see that here is a Jocotoco antpitta right here on this big 3-dimensional mural. Here it is again. And if you miss that because it's so small relative to the rest of the artwork that you see there, all you have to do is turn around and you see this statue. This thing is 10 feet tall. And it's in the center of town, and you see the egg with the little baby in it. It was really cute. was really cute. So they take their birds very seriously there, which really made me feel good in terms of the amount of pride that the people have with their rare birds. The last question that I want to address before I turn it over to Stephanie is this one about, can only bird club members go on these trips? And the answer is no. Anybody in the world can go on them. In fact, you probably will recognize most of the names of the people up there because they are bird club members, with two exceptions. Mary Harkala is a friend of Kate Graham's, and actually the two of them couldn't be part of this presentation tonight because they are in the Rio Grande Valley birding right now, the Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival. So they're in Texas. The other name you may not recognize is this last one on the left list here, Derek Nunes. This is Derek right above Robyn's head. So if I cover Robyn's head, you can see Derek behind there. Anyway, he's from California, and he has come on 3 Cayuga Bird Club trips. So he's like an honorary member of the club, even though he lives out in California. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to continue the journey.
Thank you, Jody. And before I am done, what I want to do is ask my husband, Dave, who is here. Whoops, closer, better. Thank you. I want to ask my husband, Dave, Dave, do you want to wait to the Q&A at the end to talk about? Okay, great. All right. Come on. There we go. So while I was pulling privet side by side with Jody for the Conservation Action Committee, I had plenty of time to talk to him about international birding trips led by the Bird Club. Ecuador had not been on our radar. It was never something that we had considered, but the timing of the trip in August of this year was such that my husband, Dave, and I decided, hey, this would make a perfect 35th wedding anniversary celebration for us. So for both of us, really, this trip was truly one of many firsts. It was our first organized birding tour together. It was the first international birding trip, and it was his first as a trailing spouse, so to speak, on a birding trip. And it was our first time to South America. For me, it was the first time I'd ever been south of the equator. David had been to South Africa, but neither of us to South America. And it was the first time that we'd ever hiked over 13,000 feet. That was different, or in a cloud forest. It was the first time that we've spent about 1,800 miles on a bus, or in a building that was built just spectacularly melded into a mountainside. It's the first time I've seen a Coati Mundi. It's definitely the first time I've had popcorn in my soup, which was really yummy. The popcorn was really yummy, not the Coati. It was the first time that we've ever had to pay for toilet paper at a public bathroom. And if you aren't ready for that, you better hope you have a friend who does have some. It's the first time I've eaten lunch at a police station. All that time on the bus, you have to pull off somewhere and have your lunch. It's the first time that I've ever driven across an active geological fault line that was left unpaved because the earth would just tear itself apart time and time and time again. It's the first time that we've seen families of 3 or 4 people having to fit on a single dirt bike as their only mode of transportation. It was the first time that I've ever turned a corner and been presented with a view that was so spectacular that I actually understood and felt what it meant to have my breath taken away. It's the first time we've seen an alpaca crossing sign. It was the first time I've ever received Fruit Loops as a non-dairy dessert. It's the first time that Dave had ever seen or even stepped foot into the Pacific Ocean. It was the first time that Dave had ever seen humpback whales. Oops. And it was the first time that we've ever celebrated our anniversary with a very dear family that neither of us was born into. It was the first time that we've ever had our flight delayed by volcanic activity. That was exciting. Maybe not so much to the people whose flights were canceled, but we got home okay. And in the end, it was the first time that I've added 345 lifers to my list. There were a few I didn't see. In a single trip. And the list was even longer for Dave, starting with this very horrible picture in the corner. And I promise this is the worst picture you will see out of this whole presentation. They are all better than this. The pale-legged horn arrow. That was the very first bird that I saw on the very first morning. I came out of our room and saw these birds in the yard. I just got so excited. I just grabbed my cell phone, snapped a picture, ran down Jody, what's this? And he told me, and that was my spark bird. That was the thing that lit me up for the whole rest of the trip and left both of us eager to go back there and learn more. Next, I call on Robyn. There you are, Robyn. She'll give you the next part of the presentation. Robyn? Oh, you wore the perfect shirt. Oh man, you got a
Foreshadowing. We have some foreshadowing. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so thanks. I'm Robyn Bailey and I joined the trip with my husband, Paul Paradine. I'm a wildlife biologist by training and he's a forester, not a serious birder, but a bird appreciator. Together we had been as far south as Costa Rica, but this is our first time in South America. And I'm going to share some of my favorite bird moments from the trip, as well as some of the wildlife. Just enter, okay. I'm not familiar with this computer. So I apologize in advance. I'm not a bird photographer, so these are cell phone pictures, but one of the first birds that surprised me was the Peruvian pygmy owl. I love owls and I get really excited whenever I see an owl, but I wasn't sure that we would see any owls at all, given how seldom you see them here. It's not very common to see one. But on the very first day, we had great daytime looks at this cute little owl. And what was eventually surprising about that was that this wasn't an anomaly. We continued to see them throughout the trip regularly, even while sitting outside having lunch. I remember thinking to myself as we sat outside this kind of farm to table restaurant, eating one of the best vegetarian meals I've ever had in my life. And I live in Ithaca, so that's saying something. I'm eating this delicious vegetarian food and I look up and there's just two Peruvian pygmy owls sitting in the tree. This was number 2 and 3 for the day. And I was just looking at these owls, eating my soup, thinking, this is the best thing ever. I can't even believe that those owls are sitting there watching us while we're having lunch. So very surprising and very exciting for me being an owl lover. Another bird that just shocked me was the sword-billed hummingbird. Hummingbirds in Ecuador were somewhat frustrating for me. They were hard to pin down and identify, and they zoom around in the forest really fast. And there's so many different species that it gives me anxiety just thinking back to the experience of trying to identify them. Jody can tell you I had a lot of hummingbird anxiety. But I told Jody I really wanted to see an absurd looking hummingbird. Didn't matter which one, something with a long bill or a long tail or a spiky crest. Just wanted to see one really weird hummingbird. So we had already tried unsuccessfully to stake out this bird at a different location. There were these really long flowers. I think they were called datura or something, had a really long flower that we made one stop to stake out those flowers, but we didn't see it. And that left me feeling like I had lost my chance to see it. So, the next time we were in Cajas National Park and I happened to see some of those long flowers on a tree, I watched that tree like a hawk. Other people were kind of milling around and calling out birds and I would try to look at them, but I was watching that tree like a hawk. So when that sword-billed hummingbird came in and appeared, I was so proud of myself. I could hardly believe that I had found it and called it out. And it was ridiculous. It has this giant bill and it was so perfect of a creature that to this day, I just can't even believe that's a real bird. This is obviously not my photo, but I needed to show you a photo of this hummingbird. This thing is just ridiculous. So I saw my ridiculous bird, my ridiculous hummingbird that I requested at the beginning of the trip. We stopped a few times to look for torrent duck. This is a handsome little duck of the fast flowing rivers and streams. And we found this male. I'm not sure I'll be able to use the pointer successfully, but the male is on the right. And everyone had a great look at it. We got it in the scope. And it was probably 5 minutes later that we realized the female was there behind it and had been sitting there the entire time. None of us noticed her. It looks really obvious in the photo. When you look to the left, there's the female. it looks really obvious in the photo when you blow it up on your phone, but at the time it took a full 5 minutes for us to notice that. And she was really beautiful too. And after taking this shot, I later was looking at it on my phone and realized that a black phoebe had photobombed the picture at the top. So that's a black phoebe, but it's a white-winged subspecies. So 3 birds in that picture, but I really liked the torrent duck. It's just a handsome looking duck. And these 2 were just sitting there on the rocks resting, but it would be cool to see them foraging in the fast moving water. What I enjoyed most were the birds that would sit still long enough for me to get a photo, and for my non-birder husband to be able to appreciate them and get a good look at them, take in their beauty. And 2 birds that we appreciated that for were the yellow-tailed oriole and the black and white owl. These gave us really nice looks and 0 frustration. Other birds would prove less cooperative. One of the less cooperative birds was this extremely rare violet-throated metaltail. Now, this is not the same extremely rare range-restricted hummingbird that Jody showed you earlier. This is an entirely different one. And you can see its entire global range in purple on the map here. I don't know how to use the pointer on this, but you can see that teeny tiny little purple splotch on the map of Ecuador. That's the only place it lives and nowhere else. So we visited that park on what would turn out to be Ecuador's Independence Day. We did not know that when we planned the trip, but it was Ecuadorian Independence Day. And unfortunately, that meant that there were many Ecuadorians in the park enjoying their day off, just like we would here on the 4th of July, and hiking around and playing and being kind of noisy. So the bird, which normally isn't super difficult to see, wasn't really accommodating that day because of all of the activity along the main trails. So we finally decided, let's go try this other trail over here that's not very popular. People weren't really over there in that area. But that too was unproductive. We had been there, looking for the bird and trying to find it. And Edwin, our leader, was corralling us to go. He's like, we've got to move on. The itinerary is packed. We can't stay here all day. And I pleaded with him to just let us stay 1 more minute. We'll just walk a little bit further to try for 1 more minute. And I felt like I would never have another chance to see a bird with such a restricted range. And only in Ecuador, I thought, I'm never going to have this chance again. We can't leave yet. And incredibly, as if the bird could sense my yearning, it appeared in those last 10 seconds right before we went, and I pointed it out. I was like, oh my God, there's a hummingbird. And we all get binoculars on it. And it turned out to be the violet-throated metaltail. Now, this photo makes it look like I got a really good look at it. This is just a photo from the Lab of O's Macaulay Library, but the look I got was not that great, but it was a look nevertheless. We could tell what it was. And sometimes you just have to be grateful when the universe provides you with a rare hummingbird that only lives in this one park. So that was really exciting. Not as cooperative, but super special bird for me. Okay, another funny story involves the blue-footed booby on Isla de la Plata. As you can tell from my shirt, I was really enthusiastic about seeing this bird. I already owned this sweater before we went to Ecuador. So we first got onto the island and we had gone a few hundred feet down the trail when I spotted a pair of pale birds on the distant hillside off in the distance under some brush, and I got my binoculars on them. And I got super excited when I realized they had blue feet. Now, they're pretty far away, and I made sure to tell everyone in the group, oh my God, I think there's blue-footed boobies over there. So we could all gather around and look at them through, through the binoculars or the scope, get a good look at it. So when you go to a national park in Ecuador, you have to be accompanied by a guide specific to that park. It's just like nobody left unattended. So even though we had our own guide, we had another national park guide. And she kind of looked at me and was like, don't worry about those boobies over there. You'll see boobies. And I was like, well, I don't know. We have to look at them now in case we don't see them later. And she was just like, let's keep walking. So what I didn't know then was that we were going to have plenty of good looks at blue-footed boobies. And as you can tell from the photos, they were just right there along the trail, close enough you could reach out and pat their heads if that was allowed, but it wasn't, so we didn't do that. But close enough that you could have touched them and you could see their little eyes blinking at you. It was just surreal. And I still laugh about that guide telling me, like, ma'am, just calm down. You're gonna see, just, you know, don't worry about distant, terrible looks. You're gonna see them. And rarely does a bird guide ever guarantee you a look at a bird. That's kind of a no-no for guides, to guarantee that you're gonna see something, but she knew what she was leading us towards. So that was pretty exciting. There were also Nazca boobies on the island, and we saw numerous nesting pairs of these and their babies. We also saw little fluffy baby blue-footed boobies, which look very similar, little fluffy Muppets. We also saw red-footed booby, but we saw that one from the boat, so I didn't get any kind of close picture of that. We also saw a red-billed tropic bird on the island. I didn't get a picture of that. It's a beautiful ocean-bound bird, but lots of cool birds. We also had some really close-up looks at this South American coati. It was the only coati we saw the whole trip, and it was obviously used to getting leftover kitchen scraps from the kitchen. His name is Pedro. Yes, he has a name. I have the feeling that they have to shoo Pedro out nightly with leftover fruit from where they're feeding the parrots and other birds that come to the fruit feeders. So this is actually a different species than the white-nosed coati, which I had seen in Costa Rica. So now I have 2 coatimundis on my mammal list. So he was a real cute little fella. We also saw the Guayaquil squirrel, which are these cute little squirrels with black ears and black feet and thick silvery coats with red patches. The squirrels in South America get to be very diverse and lots of different colors and cute features like tufted ears, but this was one of the cutest ones we saw. I was also surprised to learn that white-tailed deer are found in Ecuador. I didn't know that. So granted, they're really easy to see here in Ithaca, but it was pretty much the only animal in Ecuador that I would expect to see both in Ithaca and Ecuador. There's probably others, but I thought that was funny that we went all that way and saw a white-tailed deer several times. We also had opportunities to see green sea turtle and humpback whales. I had seen humpback whales migrating along the coast in California before, but never like this, where they were jumping out of the water and so close. They were slapping their tails on the water to communicate with each other. They were breaching. This was actually one of my husband's favorite parts of the trip, because he got to sit up on the top of the boat, and he could, from that vantage point, he could see the whales diving down underneath the boat, and he could kind of see them from a different angle than the rest of us. And he thought that was so cool that he counts it among one of his all-time favorite memories of his lifetime. So for me, that was really great to hear from him, because as a birder, I was worried a little bit about bringing him along. He's a nature enthusiast, but not a serious birder. And I worried that, you know, it might be too much birding for him. Would he be grumpy getting up every morning on these early morning wake-up calls? Would he lose interest? This is a 12-day trek, all day birding every day. So I was a little worried he would lose interest, but I needn't have worried, because the birds are so spectacular that they held his interest, and he enjoyed looking at them just as much as everyone else. He also found lots of plants to enjoy, flowers to photograph, as well as the flowers, mammals, insects, and everything else that Ecuador has to offer. He also loved the mountains and the scenery, so I can tell you that he is ready to go back. And if you're wondering if you should bring your kind of non-birding partner along, I can tell you that as long as they enjoy the outdoors and being outside a lot, they'll be fine. I think by the end of it, Paul had caught the birding bug and was super interested, but if there were kittens around, he would stop birding and pet the kittens. You can see in the second photo, everybody else is birding and Paul is petting a kitten. So, but you could tell from his face that he had a great time. His smile says it all. He loved everything about it. And I was kind of relieved too. I thought it might be more grueling than it was. Thought it might be like the situation where you get up at 4 a.m. and death march all day long and, you know, fall into bed at the end of the day. And it was pretty physical, like just a lot of walking and being outside all day, but it was nowhere near the grueling experience that I kind of feared it might be. As a wildlife biologist, it's hard for me to go on vacation anywhere without noticing local conservation challenges, and Ecuador did have its fair share. One thing that concerned me a little bit were the feral cats that were pretty common everywhere that people were. We have feral cats here, but the density there was pretty noticeable. And in Ecuador, many animals are allowed to roam free, including dogs, pigs, chickens, horses, cows, donkeys, just about everything. I think we saw just about everything out and about, alpacas, but the outdoor cats were pretty common. And that to me felt like, we all know that the research says that they can be pretty devastating to birds and wildlife. So, that was a concern. I don't think that there's a good program for keeping them spayed and under population control. So I think they're just they're high density of feral cats there, which is concerning. The other thing is the apparent loss of habitat that you can see when you go there due to grazing and agriculture. We passed mountainside after mountainside that looked like this, which looks really pretty at first, but when you get in there, you notice that the forest has been removed and it's been replaced with grazing pasture or corn. And in the lowlands, it's similar, but flat and miles of banana plantations. While it's clear that people have to eat, the economic benefit of forests is just not being appreciated there. And ecotourism and bird watching in general are not major parts of the economy, as I have seen in some other places like Costa Rica. In fact, many people stop to look at us as though they had never seen anybody birding in their community, which is fair. We went to some pretty remote places, so I just don't think they have the kind of green tourism industry. But they do need some solutions to these challenges. And this is a problem when you see those birds that have that teeny tiny dot on the map as their range. And this is the only place in the world where they live. It wasn't uncommon for us to see the grazing animals just right outside where the boundary of that park stopped. People would graze right up to the edge. So it's clear that if the park wasn't there, the habitat would get converted. And the blue-throated hillstar was only discovered in 2017. Maybe everything in Ecuador hasn't been discovered yet, and we just don't know. It's something I think about as a wildlife biologist, not to bring the mood down, but I can hardly go anywhere where I don't, notice these things because it's part of the trip and it's part of the mission, as Jody mentioned in the, in the very beginning, that we want to learn about the conservation challenges of these places. But there is a lot to be optimistic about when facing these challenges. We got to see firsthand the work of the Jocotoco Foundation, which is doing the hard work of actually putting these sanctuaries in place and putting boots on the ground people who caretake the property. They support the ecotourists and birders that do come to Ecuador with lodges, guides, meals, transportation, and most importantly, preserving these places that we most wanted to see conserved. So a huge kudos to this foundation. It deserves your support and our support. And I saw personally 264 lifers on this trip. I forgot the overall number of birds that I saw, but the number of lifers I checked was 264. So that's certainly a little bit hard to match. Thank you to Jody and Cayuga Bird Club for organizing such a wonderful itinerary. And I will stop there. This is my last slide and turn it back over to Jody to close this out. Oh, Stephanie.
Oh, any of this. What I would like to do is just end this and ask, I don't know if we can, oh, wait, yes.
2 more slides.
Thank you. Yes, can't finish without mentioning our driver and our guide, Edwin and Kevin. Well, do I just click on the, how do I get the?
If you put your mouse on the bottom,
Mhm.
there, maybe this.
There we go. All right, so.
If your sound's turned on.
So one of the things we learned from Edwin was that he learned his English through music, through watching movies and so on. And he found a real kindred spirit with my husband, who also enjoys Rat Pack type music. So the two of them would just strike up New York, New York, or something else time after time. But Edwin would call us familia. He would say, my English, when I get very excited, it disappears. So if I yell, familia, come here quick, everybody come, because I have a good bird. And we got to experience that over and over. He was a wonderful person. It really did feel like an extended family by the end of the trip, which is just a spectacular thing when you have this group of strangers get together and have good chemistry over the course of nearly 2 weeks. He and Kevin, who was an absolute magical bus driver. Jody didn't mention the bus getting stuck at one point on the top of a mountain. Trust me, if you are driving in a bus and you go to the opening of a park, an entrance, and the guide is on a horse and he tells you, the road's fine, go right ahead. Think twice. But Kevin, he managed to get us in and out of some of the most crazy places. It was wonderful. And whenever I hear this song, I will think about that farewell party where we all got together and Dave asked for them to cue up some special music. And we got to do a little sing along at the end, which is something I never really appreciated very much growing up. So, whoop, still singing. Okay. So the next thing to point out is that we do have a follow-up. We are hoping to have a reunion of the familia to get together to see the northern part of the country and have an extension down into the Amazon. So we are looking forward to returning to your country. And I suppose, if there's other people who are really excited who want to come too, please join us. The information is out on the Holbrook site. I think what I want to do is ask if someone could turn up the lights and we can have a few minutes of questions and answers before we clear out for the night. Dave, I'll ask you if you want to say a couple of things about being a non-birder, beginner birder, trailing spouse. How'd you feel? You heard about Paul's experience. Oh, we told Lee we wouldn't make her come up.
Only if she wants to.
Only if she wants to. And if she doesn't want to, she doesn't have to. But Dave came along, so I'm going to make him. So
I would definitely second Robyn's comment about having some background in nature, appreciation to nature. Mine was completely different from forestry. I grew up eating birds. So I got all of my introduction to nature and sitting out in the wild and enjoying it and taking it in. And then Stephanie brought me into the birding world. But yeah, the whole trailing spouse, don't be afraid. So if you're inspired or want to become a trailing spouse birder, it's easy to do. You're going to get to some great places that you'll probably never see for any other reason. So from my perspective, it was well worth calling out the wrong bird more times than I wanted to the point of embarrassment. And I had to learn, okay, you can be excited, but don't say it's this because it won't be. And at one time, I had it right. I didn't say anything. And it turned out to be Edwin's magic bird. It was the king vulture. And I had seen it, I saw it, and I think Robyn, you saw it too, eventually. And sure enough, Edwin's, he sees it fly over. I didn't say anything. That's it, that's my bird. And I missed my moment. So anyway, great opportunity, would recommend it to anyone beginner expert.
Thank you.